Hi, everyone. English 4113, the 24th class, the third bit on beloved. So I'm going to try to make this quick. I've got an image here in the front from the newspaper North Star, the North Star, which is Frederick Douglass's newspaper, sort of obviously an anti-slavery newspaper published for a good long while. And here we have an image of an enslaved Black man looking to the North Star, which is guiding him away from slavery. Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the father of us all, and all men are brethren. This is from 1850. So have this in mind as I go through, just talking about some of the themes and points about isolation in this novel. So when Setha reconnects with Paul D, she briefly has this hope that she belongs to the world and to this community. She is here thinking and remembering about that experience and says, Paul D convinced me there was a world out there and that I could live in it, should have known better, did know better. Whatever is going on outside my door ain't for me. The world is in this room. It's a total shrinking of her world into just herself, Denver, and beloved. And there's nothing else left. Her two boys are gone, baby Suggs is gone, and Paul D has abandoned her in disgust, having learned what she did to keep herself and her family out of slavery. So now she is totally isolated. She wasn't entirely isolated, though. In her time in Cincinnati, she had 28 glorious days where between her arrival and the arrival of the slave catchers, she had a community, which is described here in 173, about all the things that have been left behind. And this is being done in the form of an ubi sunt. It's an ancient literary genre or trope. It's Latin terms, two words that mean, where are they? Ubi sunt qui ante nos, where are those who came before? Or in French, où sont les neiges d'antan? Where are the snows of yesteryear? It's a way of writing, asking about the things that are no longer with us. You describe them, you make them present, but also mark their absence at the same time. It's an unheimlich or kind of haunting way of talking about loss. And this is what's happening here. No more dancing in the clearing or happy feeds. No more discussions, stormy or quiet, about the true meaning of the fugitive bill, the sediment fee, God's ways, and Negro pews, anti-slavery, manumission, skin voting, Republicans, Dred Scott, book learning, sojourners, high-wheeled buggy, the colored ladies of Delaware, Ohio, and the other weighty issues that held them in chairs, scraping the floorboards or pacing them in agony or exhilaration. No anxious wait for the North Star, or news of a beat-off. No sighing at a new betrayal or hand clapping at a small victory at Sojourner Truth. And so this is a community of Black people who are living in freedom, in a very fragile freedom indeed, in Cincinnati, connected to the wider world of free Black people and Black people trying to be free and speaking to each other, engaging in political discussions and political action, reading newspapers, having a world together where they are all political subjects together. And this is what Setha loses when she kills to keep her freedom and her family free. And also then when Paul D finds out about it 18 years later, when Stampede tells him. And so now they're cut off. Notice what they're cut off from. There's a bit here when baby Suggs is about to move into 124 for the first time. And she's being told this, you're going to a nice house, big too. A preacher and his family was in there, 18 children. Have mercy, says baby Suggs. Where'd they go? Took off to Illinois. Bishop Allen gave him a congregation up there. Big. I think we're meant to believe that this is a Black preacher. Typically what Morrison does is she leaves the race of a character unmarked unless they're white. And she'll remark when somebody is white, right? Black becomes the racially unmarked color in a lot of her prose. So we have a Black preacher who's politically connected or connected to the larger world of Black preaching. Think of an AME church, right? And he's gone north. He's moving on up in the world, and he's now left behind. And we have this sense that Cincinnati and the world of Cincinnati is shrinking, right? Although we have this kind of political community, there's already a sense, even at this moment on page 146, that there's a slight isolation happening. Now, we also have this important bit when Paul D is being shown the newspaper by Stampede, and we get into his head, because again, Toni Morrison lets us into so many different characters' heads. Free and direct discourse is what she's doing. And he's remarking on the way newspapers work. He says, because there's no way in hell a black face could appear in a newspaper if the story was about something anybody wanted to hear. A whip of fear broke through the heart chambers as soon as you saw a Negro's face in the paper, since the face was not there because the person had a healthy baby or outran a street mob, nor was it there because the person had been killed or maimed or caught or burned or jailed or whipped or evicted or stomped or raped or cheated. So that's, since that could hardly qualify as news in a newspaper, right? Black lives are, for a white paper, they don't matter. It would have been something out of the ordinary, something white people would find interesting, truly different, worth a few minutes of teeth sucking, if not gasps. So this is how Paul D feels about things at this point. He feels totally isolated. And the striking thing about it is that he's wrong. He's wrong about newspapers in this period. Again, we have the North Star, and we also have things like this. The Pacific Appeal, which is I've shown to you before, which is an African-American newspaper published in San Francisco, 1862 to 1880. And here is that bit where they're interviewing Robert Garner, who's the survivor of that incident with Margaret Garner, the historical Margaret Garner, who tries to kill her family and kills one member to seek to preserve their freedom. So Paul D feels isolated as well. And then we can pose the question of who it is that she's with. We believe that Beloved is the ghost of her murdered child, but we also have this record of who it is who is actually haunting the house. When Setha wrapped her head and bundled up to go to town, it was already been morning, and when she left the house, she neither saw the prince nor heard the voices that ringed 124 like a noose. Noose is a very important word there. It's anticipating lynching or recalling lynching, the extrajudicial murder of Black people by white mob violence, and oftentimes by white elites, right? And many lynchings, people like the governor or the mayor or the chief of police were there. These elites were there, right? Approving and encouraging the violence. So it was terrorist violence against Black people. And Stampede, when he tries to approach the house, he hears voices, it's a roar of voices, and here's how he describes it. This time, although he couldn't cipher but one word, he believed he knew who spoke them, the people of the broken necks, of fire-cooked blood, and Black girls who had lost their ribbons. What a roaring. We start to get the sense that Beloved is both a ghost of an individual and also a representation of every Black person who's been murdered in the slave trade and its results. And we're going to see that, especially in the long poetry, where we have Beloved talking about the Middle Passage. And to think about basically the way that lynching is working, even in this period. Here's from a history of lynching from and I'm just showing you a period of the timeline from 1869 to 1884. If you look at this website, you're going to get basically little dots for every recorded instance of lynching, depending on how you define lynching. It gives you a chance to define it in two different ways, from the 1830s up through the present. And the orange dots here are Black people. And we have this memory here of 1874 from the novel. 1874, and white folks are still on the loose. Whole towns wiped clean of Negroes, 87 lynchings in 1 year alone in Kentucky, 4 colored schools burned to the ground, grown men whipped like children, children whipped like adults, Black men raped by the crew, property taken, necks broken. Here is Kentucky. Here is Ohio. And here's Indiana. You can see that most of the lynchings in this period and this region are happening in Kentucky. One of the reasons why Kentucky is now so predominantly white, and the numbers in the high 80% or low 90%, is because there is anti-Black violence in the late 1860s and early 1870s, where hundreds and hundreds of white people would drive entire Black communities out of the state. And so we can say that the current political makeup of Kentucky and the reliable votes that it's been expected for Republican candidates is a result of anti-Black violence that dates back to the 1870s, which made Kentucky into basically an almost all-white state. This is the world that Setha inhabits. She is isolated, or in a sense, she's too crowded, but what she's crowded by is her own isolation amid a roar of violence and mourning. And what is going to get her out of that or into something else? Well, you just have to read on. So I also wanted to point out one last thing, and we can talk about this in class today. This phrase, nobody saw them falling, which is repeated twice on 174. So Setha and Denver and Beloved go out skating. They've got one ice skate, a man's ice skate for some reason. And that's all they have to skate on, but they share it and they have a wonderful time. And there's two ways to read that phrase, nobody saw them falling. One is nobody's looking at them. They can fall and nobody's there to pick them up. No one's there to help them out. Nobody's concerned about them. Nobody cares, or nobody saw them falling. There's nobody to mock them, no one to make fun of them, no one to pass judgment on them, no one to think they're making fools of themselves. And these are two different forms of being left alone, two different forms of isolation. And I'm wondering how these operate in relation to the other kinds of isolation that we see as such major features of the third quarter of this novel. So I'm looking forward to our conversation later today.